With a single word, burden, he made an irreversible mistake. He didn't know that the woman he just dismissed was the only one with the power to decide his downfall. A power born not from money, but from legacy. A secret kept hidden for love, now unleashed by betrayal. Witness the beginning of the takedown, right here. Whose side are you on in this story? Share your thoughts and hit that subscribe button now. We can't wait to see how you rate this story on a scale of 1 to 10. Don't miss it. The grand halls of the American Museum of Natural History shimmered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, transformed into a sanctuary of aspiration and elegance for the Youth STEM Forward Gala. Fossils and star maps loomed in the shadows, silent witnesses to human ingenuity, while the air hummed with the murmur of conversations. Scientists, philanthropists, and eager young minds mingling over champagne flutes and canapes. At the heart of it all stood Lila Jordan Thorne, 28 and radiant in her midnight blue gown, its subtle patterns inspired by the geometric artistry of her African heritage. She watched with quiet pride as the spotlight fell on the stage, where a line of teenagers, her foundation scholars, shared their stories. One by one, they spoke. A 17-year-old from Brooklyn described how Lila's program had funded her robotics project, turning scrap metal into a prototype that could revolutionize urban farming. Another, a boy from Harlem with a stutter that vanished when he talked about code, explained his AI model for predicting climate patterns in underserved communities. Lila's chest swelled with emotion. These weren't just success stories. They were lives she had touched, futures she had helped forge. Her foundation, built from the ground up with grants and sheer determination, was more than a charity. It was her legacy, a bridge between her intellectual roots and the world she wanted to change. As the applause thundered, Lila stepped forward to introduce the next speaker, her voice steady and warm. These young innovators remind us that science isn't just about equations. It's about equity, about lifting those who've been overlooked. The crowd nodded, their faces alight with approval. For a moment, she felt invincible, the weight of her marriage's subtle strains fading into the background. But then a ripple stirred the room. The double doors at the far end swung open with a flourish, and in strode Colin Haverford, her husband of 3 years, 30, and exuding the kind of polished charisma that turned heads. His suit was impeccably tailored, navy blue with a subtle sheen, and he moved with the confidence of a man who owned every space he entered. Whispers followed him like a wake. That's Haverford, the real estate wonderkin. Building empires while she's saving the world. Colin flashed his trademark smile, shaking hands as he made his way to the front, arriving fashionably late as always. Lila's heart skipped. Part of her hope tonight would be different, that he'd stand beside her without needing to eclipse her light. He reached her side just as the applause died down, leaning in to kiss her cheek, a gesture that felt more performative than affectionate. Sorry I'm late, darling. Traffic was a nightmare. His voice was smooth, but Lila caught the edge, the way his eyes scanned the room for bigger fish. She nodded, forcing a smile, and turned back to the stage. The event continued, but the energy had shifted. Colin's presence drew eyes away from the scholars, toward the power couple they supposedly formed. It wasn't long before Eleanor Vance approached them during a brief intermission. Eleanor, a silver-haired philanthropist in her 60s with a reputation for spotting true visionaries, had been a key donor to Lila's foundation. Her eyes sparkled as she clasped Lila's hands. Lila, my dear, what you've built here is nothing short of revolutionary. These children, their projects could change the world. Your work is transforming lives, one equation at a time. It's inspiring to see someone with such passion leading the charge. Lila's cheeks warmed with genuine gratitude. Thank you, Eleanor. It's all about giving them the tools they deserve. Without supporters like you. Before she could finish, Colin interjected, his hand settling heavily on her shoulder. He chuckled, a sound that carried just a hint of condescension, drawing Eleanor's gaze. Oh, absolutely, Eleanor. Lila's heart is pure gold. Always has been. But let's be honest. In a world like ours, sometimes I wonder if a golden heart isn't a bit of a burden. It needs steel to back it up, right? Don't worry, I'm the steel for both of us. He winked as if it were a charming quip, his grip tightening slightly on her shoulder. The words landed like a slap. sharp and unexpected. Lila's smile froze, her breath catching in her throat. A burden? Dead weight in his world of deals and skyscrapers? She felt the heat rise to her face, not from anger alone, but from the raw humiliation of it. Said so casually in front of Eleanor, a woman whose respect Lila had earned through years of tireless effort. Eleanor's eyebrows knitted together, her eyes flicking from Colin to Lila with a flicker of sympathy, perhaps even pity. The older woman opened her mouth as if to respond, but Colin was already steering the conversation elsewhere, launching into a story about his latest tower project. Lila stood there, trapped in the moment, her mind reeling. It wasn't malice in Colin's eyes. She knew him well enough to see that. It was insecurity, the gnawing fear of being overshadowed by his father's legacy, his sister Isabel's ruthless ambition. In the Thorne family, new money barons with old-world pretensions, Colin had always fought to prove he was more than a shadow. But tonight, in this room filled with her achievements, he diminished her to elevate himself. A golden heart, a burden. The words echoed in her head, twisting like a knife. She excused herself politely, murmuring something about fresh air, and slipped away from the crowd. The museum's corridors felt cooler, quieter, away from the glittering facade. Leaning against a display case of ancient artifacts, Lila pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heartbeat to slow. How had it come to this? She'd married Colin, thinking they were partners, her intellect complementing his drive. But lately the cracks had widened. His dismissals of her work as cute philanthropy, his insistence on controlling their finances, his sister Isabel's icy stares that labeled her an outsider. And now this, public and pointed. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. No, she wouldn't crumble here. Not when those kids on stage needed her strength. Yet as she straightened her gown and touched the pearl necklace at her throat, an heirloom from her mother, a symbol of quiet resilience, something shifted inside her. The ache wasn't just pain, it was a spark, a resolve forming in the silence. Tonight's slight wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. Back in the hall, the gala continued, laughter and toasts filling the air. But for Lila, the evening's warmth had turned cold. She returned to Colin's side, her smile a mask, already planning her next move in the quiet recesses of her mind. The penthouse overlooking Central Park was a fortress of glass and steel, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the glittering Manhattan skyline like a mocking reminder of the empire Colin so desperately chased. But tonight, as the clock ticked past midnight, the space felt suffocating, a gilded cage where Lila Jordan Thorne paced in silence. The gala's echoes lingered in her mind, Colin's words sharp as a blade, slicing through her composure. A burden. She whispered it to herself, tasting the bitterness, while Colin slept soundly in their king-size bed, oblivious to the storm he'd unleashed. How could he not see? Or worse, did he simply not care? Lila slipped into her study, a sanctuary of polished wood and stacked bookshelves lined with tomes on urban equity and STEM innovation. The room was hers alone, a remnant of the life she'd built before marrying into the Thorne whirlwind. She closed the door softly, the click echoing like a finality, and sank into her leather chair. The city's lights flickered below, indifferent to her turmoil. Sleep was impossible. Her thoughts raced, replaying the evening. The scholar's triumphs, Eleanor's praise, and then Colin's casual dismissal, reducing her to an accessory in his narrative of strength. With a deep breath, she powered on her laptop, the screen's glow casting shadows across her face. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing in a password she'd memorized years ago, one tied to her mother's birthday. The encrypted file opened, Jordan Legacy. It wasn't just data, it was a vault of secrets, a digital testament to her family's quiet power. The Washingtons, her maiden name lineage, had been old money intellectuals, black scholars and activists who'd amassed wealth through strategic investments in education and real estate during the Harlem Renaissance. But they'd never flaunted it, choosing influence over ostentation. When her aunt passed 3 years ago, the trust had fallen to Lila, $500 million in diversified assets, stocks, bonds, and prime land holdings, including the undervalued plot in Red Hook that now anchored her community trust. She scrolled through the documents, her heart aching. She'd never touched a dime, not wanting to bruise Colin's ego. In their early days, he'd charmed her with tales of building from nothing, his new money family rising through sheer grit. She'd believed in their partnership, scaling back her own ambitions to support his. Fewer late nights at the foundation, more appearances as the perfect wife. Love meant compromise, she told herself. But now, staring at the balance sheets, frustration boiled into anger. 500 million, enough to fund 1,000 STEM programs, to reshape cities, and she'd hidden it, dimmed her light so he could shine. All for what? To be called a burden in front of the world? Tears blurred her vision, hot and unbidden. She wiped them away fiercely, remembering her mother's voice, stern yet loving. Lila, child, your worth isn't in what you hide, it's in what you build. The pearl necklace at her throat felt heavier, an heirloom passed down from generations of resilient women who'd navigated white-dominated spaces with grace and guile. Her mother had worn it through civil rights marches, her aunt through boardroom battles. Now it was Lila's turn. The ache in her chest wasn't just betrayal, it was awakening. Colin didn't know about the trust. He'd never asked about her family's past beyond polite inquiries. To him, she was the pretty intellectual from a respectable but modest background, a compliment to his ascent. But modesty was a choice, not a reality. As the minutes stretched, Lila's mind sharpened. This wasn't the first slight. Isabel, Colin's sister, had always treated her like an interloper, her cold stares at family dinners, whispering gold digger, without words. Robert, the patriarch, offered gruff approval, but never equality. And Colin, his control had crept in, managing their joint accounts, dismissing her input on investments as unnecessary worry. But tonight's humiliation crystallized it. She wasn't a partner, she was a prop. Her gaze fell on a framed photo on her desk, her with Colin at their wedding, smiles wide and hopeful. She turned it face down, a small act of defiance. No more. She needed answers, proof that her instincts weren't paranoia. Pulling out her phone, she dialed James Chen, her family's lawyer and a confidant since childhood. It was late, but James was the type who answered crises at any hour. He picked up on the second ring. Lila, everything okay? It's past 1. She leaned back, her voice steadying as resolve took hold. Not really, James, but it will be. I need your help, discreetly. Pull the ownership docs for the Red Hook Community Trust. Make sure everything's ironclad. A pause, then his tone sharpened, professional and alert. Of course. What's going on? Lila hesitated, glancing at the closed door, half expecting Colin to burst in. And dig into Colin's recent bridge loan for Haverford Towers, the one he closed last month. Something feels off. Terms, guarantors, all of it. I have a bad feeling his ambition's leading him down a dangerous path. James didn't press for details. He knew her well enough to trust her gut. Consider it done. I'll have prelims by morning. Lila, you sound different. Stronger. She touched the necklace again, a faint smile breaking through. I am. Thanks, James. Talk soon. Hanging up, she closed the laptop, the screen's light fading like the illusions of her marriage. Outside, the city pulsed on, unaware of the shift within her. For the first time in years, Lila felt the weight lifting, not as a burden shed, but as power reclaimed. As she slipped back into bed beside Colin, his soft snores a stark contrast to her racing mind. She knew this night marked the end of silence. Tomorrow the shadows would yield their secrets, and she would be ready. But sleep still eluded her, her thoughts already racing toward the dawn, and whatever truths James might uncover. The dawn broke over Manhattan with a muted gray light, the city stirring restlessly beneath a sky heavy with clouds. In the Central Park penthouse, Lila Jordan Thorne sat at her study's desk, the encrypted Jordan legacy file still open on her laptop, its numbers a silent testament to the power she'd long kept hidden. Colin's casual cruelty at the gala 2 nights ago, a burden in a world needing steel, had ignited a fire in her, and her late-night call to James Chen had set a quiet machine in motion. Now, as the clock ticked towards 7 a.m., she sipped black coffee, her eyes fixed on her phone. waiting for James's update. Colin slept on, unaware of the storm gathering in the shadows, his morning routine of boardroom bravado hours away. Lila's pulse quickened. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was hunting. Her phone buzzed, and James's name flashed on the screen. She answered immediately, keeping her voice low. "Tell me you found something." James's tone was clipped, urgent. "Lila, it's worse than you thought. Colin used your name as a personal guarantor for the Haverford Towers loan, without your consent. That's fraud, plain and simple. The loan's through a shell company, brokered by Leo Vance. The terms are predatory. If Colin defaults, the lender gets everything, including your Red Hook land." Lila's grip tightened on the phone, her breath catching. Red Hook, the heart of her community trust, a plot she'd fought to protect for affordable housing, was at stake. "He wouldn't dare," she whispered, but the truth settled like ice in her veins. Colin's desperation to outshine his family had driven him to betrayal. "What else?" "I'm digging deeper," James said. "The broker's shady. No public records beyond a P.O. box in Delaware. I've got a contact pulling strings to trace the paper trail. You were right to trust your gut. I'll call when I have more." Lila hung up, her mind racing. She glanced at the pearl necklace on her desk, its soft gleam a reminder of her mother's words. "Build, Lila, but protect what's yours." She wouldn't let Colin's ambition steal her legacy. Standing, she paced the study, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. The penthouse felt alien now, a stage for a marriage unraveling thread by thread. She needed to move carefully, but time was short. Meanwhile, across town in a sleek midtown office, Colin Haverford leaned back in a leather chair, his tie loosened, a glass of bourbon in hand despite the early hour. Leo Vance sat across from him, all sharp smiles and sharper eyes, his black suit pristine as he slid a tablet across the desk. "Just sign here, Colin," Leo said, voice smooth as silk. "The loan's locked in. With the Jordan name backing it, investors are eating it up. You're about to make Haverford Towers the crown jewel of the city." Colin's jaw tightened, his fingers hovering over the tablet. He wanted to believe Leo, needed to. Isabel, his sister, had always been the Thorne family's brain, her ruthless precision outpacing him at every turn. His father, Robert, saw him as a placeholder, not a successor. This project was his chance to prove them wrong, to build something undeniable. "You're sure the terms are solid?" he asked, a flicker of doubt in his green-gray eyes. Leo leaned forward, exuding confidence. "Solid as steel, my friend. The Jordan name's your ace. Unassailable. Trust me, this is your moment." Colin nodded, signing the digital document with a flourish, ignoring the unease curling in his gut. He didn't see Leo's smile tighten, a predator's satisfaction as the trap closed. Back at the penthouse, Lila's phone buzzed again. James's voice was quieter now, almost grim. "Lila, I got it. An encrypted email from Leo to an exec at Pinnacle Group, a rival developer. They're setting Colin up to fail. The loan's a poison pill. High interest, accelerated repayment. If he misses a single payment, Pinnacle swoops in, takes the project for pennies, and your Red Hook land with it. Leo's playing both sides." Lila sank into her chair, her heart pounding. This wasn't just about her marriage anymore. It was a calculated strike, a chess game where she and Colin were pawns. Leo Vance, Eleanor's nephew, had always been too smooth, his charm a veneer for something colder. She remembered his lingering handshake at the gala, the way his eyes had flicked to Colin with a hint of mockery. "What's Leo's angle?" she asked, voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath. "Money and power," James said. "Pinnacle's paying him to sabotage Colin. He's banking on your silence, thinking you're too loyal to act. What do you want to do?" Lila's gaze drifted to the window, the city sprawling below like a battlefield. Silence wasn't an option. Not anymore. "Document everything," she said. "Every email, every signature, every move. And James, get me a meeting with my financial advisor. I'm moving the trust's assets today, out of Colin's reach." "Done," James replied. "And Lila, be careful. Leo's not the only one watching you. Isabel's been asking questions about your foundation's funding." Lila's lips pressed into a thin line. "Isabel?" Colin's sister, the Thorne family's iron fist, had never trusted her, her cold stares slicing through every family dinner. If Isabel sensed Lila's countermove, the game would get uglier. "Noted," she said. "Keep this between us." As she hung up, the study door creaked open. Colin stood there, hair tousled, his smile lazy but guarded. "Early morning, darling? You look tense." His voice carried a teasing lilt, but his eyes searched hers as if sensing the shift. Lila met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Just work," she said, closing her laptop. "You know how it is." He nodded, accepting the lie, and turned away, oblivious to the storm he'd invited. Lila's fingers brushed her pearl necklace, her resolve hardening. The shadows were moving, but so was she, and she'd be damned if she let them win. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel buzzed with anticipation, its opulent chandeliers casting golden light across a sea of tailored suits and shimmering gowns. The Haverford Towers press conference was Colin's moment to shine, a stage for his ambition to eclipse the Thorne family's shadow. Lila Jordan Thorne stood near the back, her elegant figure half hidden among the crowd of investors, reporters, and New York's elite. The revelations from James Chen's investigation, Colin's fraudulent use of her name, Leo Vance's betrayal, and the predatory loan threatening her Red Hook Community Trust, burned in her chest like a smoldering coal. Tonight she wasn't the supportive wife. She was a strategist, poised to reclaim her power. On stage, Colin stood tall, his navy suit crisp, his smile radiating confidence as he gripped the podium. "Haverford Towers isn't just a building," he declared, his voice carrying the practiced charm of a seasoned CEO. "It's a legacy, a beacon of progress for this city." The crowd leaned in, captivated, cameras flashing. Lila watched, her pulse steady but fierce, noting the faint sheen of sweat on Colin's brow. He believed he was untouchable, blind to the noose tightening around him, orchestrated by Leo Vance and Pinnacle Group. But Lila had seen the shadows, and she was ready to drag them into the light. James Chen stood near a side entrance, his unassuming frame blending with the staff, a tablet tucked under his arm. Their eyes met briefly, a silent signal that everything was in place. Lila's fingers grazed the pearl necklace at her throat, her mother's heirloom grounding her as she recalled the encrypted email James had uncovered. Leo's plan to let Colin default, seizing her Red Hook land for pennies. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a calculated theft of her legacy. She'd spent the past 48 hours moving her $500 million trust into secure accounts, untouchable by Colin or his family. Now, it was time to act. As Colin launched into a glowing description of the tower's eco-friendly design, Lila stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The room's energy shifted, heads turning as she moved through the crowd, her midnight blue gown catching the light. She stopped near the front, her voice cutting through the air like a blade, calm but unyielding. "Excuse me, Colin, but before these investors commit to your legacy, they deserve to know the truth. Haverford Towers is built on fraud." The room froze. Colin's smile faltered, his green-gray eyes locking onto hers, a flicker of confusion giving way to dread. The crowd stirred, whispers rippling like wildfire. Leo Vance, lounging in a corner with his trademark smirk, stiffened, his glass of champagne pausing midair. Lila held Colin's gaze, her expression not of anger but of quiet authority, the kind that commanded without shouting. "You used my name as a guarantor for this project's loan," she continued, her words measured, each one landing like a stone. "Without my knowledge or consent. That's not just unethical, it's illegal." Colin opened his mouth, but no words came. The screen behind him, meant to display architectural renderings, flickered. A new image appeared. The Red Hook Community Trust logo, with a bold line of text, "Sole landowner, Lila Jordan Thorne." Gasps erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones, fingers flying over screens. James's team had moved like clockwork, distributing digital packets to every attendee, loan documents, forged signatures, and the damning email between Leo and Pinnacle Group's executive. The evidence was undeniable, a house of cards collapsing in real time. "Lila, what are you doing?" Colin hissed, stepping toward her, his voice low but desperate. His hand reached out, as if to pull her back, but she stepped aside, her posture unyielding. "I'm telling the truth," she said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "You gambled with my legacy, Colin. You thought I wouldn't notice or fight back." Leo pushed through the crowd, his face pale, his usual swagger gone. "This is a misunderstanding," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "A clerical error, nothing more." But the murmurs grew louder, investors exchanging glances, their trust in Colin evaporating. A woman in a pearl gray suit, a prominent hedge fund manager, stood and demanded, "Is this true, Haverford? Did you forge her signature?" The question hung like a guillotine. Colin's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to Leo, then back to Lila. For a moment, she saw not the confident CEO, but the man she'd married, vulnerable, cornered, his ambition crumbling under the weight of his choices. "Lila, let's talk privately," he pleaded, but his voice was drowned by the chaos. The screen shifted again, now showing a timeline of the loan's terms, the predatory interest rates glaring in bold red. The room was a storm of questions, accusations, and flashing cameras. Lila didn't need to say more. The evidence spoke for her. She turned, her gaze briefly meeting Eleanor Vance's, who stood near the back, her expression a mix of shock and quiet respect. Lila's heart pounded, not with fear but with a strange calm. She'd reclaimed her voice, her power. As she walked toward the exit, the crowd parting like a sea, she felt Isabel Thorne's icy stare from the sidelines. Isabel, always the puppet master, hadn't spoken, but her presence was a warning. This wasn't over. Outside, the cool night air hit Lila's face, grounding her. She paused, breathing deeply, the city's pulse syncing with her own. Behind her, the ballroom erupted in chaos, Colin's legacy unraveling, Leo's betrayal exposed. She'd struck the first blow, but the war was far from won. Isabel's silence, Colin's desperation, and the SEC's inevitable scrutiny loomed ahead. Lila touched her necklace, whispering to herself, "This is just the beginning." The truth was out, and she was no longer a burden. She was a force. The fallout from the Haverford Towers press conference hung over New York like a storm cloud, the city's financial pages ablaze with headlines of fraud and betrayal. Lila Jordan Thorne sat in a sleek, glass-walled meeting room in James Chen's law office. The Manhattan skyline a muted backdrop to the tension within. The chaos of the ballroom, her calm exposure of Colin's forgery, the screen flashing her Red Hook Community Trust as the true landowner, and Leo Vance's pale-faced retreat had sent shockwaves through the Thorne empire. Haverford Towers stock had plummeted overnight, the SEC announcing a formal investigation by morning. Lila's hands rested steady on the polished table, her pearl necklace a quiet anchor, but her mind churned with the weight of what came next. She'd torn down Colin's facade, but now she had to decide how far to push. James sat beside her, his tablet open to a dossier of evidence. Forged signatures, predatory loan terms, and the damning email between Leo and Pinnacle Group. Across the table sat Eleanor Vance, her silver hair catching the light, her expression a mix of resolve and restrained fury. Next to her was Colin's lawyer, a wiry man named Harold Grayson, his tie loosened as if he'd aged a decade in a day. Colin was conspicuously absent, his absence a silent admission of defeat. Lila had expected to feel triumph, but instead a quiet ache lingered. Not for the man who'd betrayed her, but for the life she'd thought they'd shared. Eleanor spoke first, her voice measured but sharp. "Lila, I had no idea Leo was capable of this. To think he used my name, my connections, to orchestrate this betrayal." She spat the word, her eyes narrowing. "I trusted him, and he played us all, especially you." Lila nodded, her face composed. "He played Colin too, but Colin made his choices. He used my name, my legacy, without a thought." Her voice was steady, but the memory of his words at the gala, a burden, still stung, fueling her resolve. Grayson cleared his throat, his fingers tapping nervously. "Ms. Jordan Thorne, Mr. Haverford acknowledges errors in judgment. He's prepared to cooperate fully with the SEC to mitigate criminal charges, but we're here to discuss your next steps. A civil lawsuit could destroy him financially, permanently." Lila's eyes flicked to James, who gave a subtle nod. his calm presence grounding her. She leaned forward, her tone deliberate. I don't want destruction, Mr. Grayson. I want justice. Colin forged my signature, risked my Red Hook land, and gambled with my foundation's future. But I'm not here to ruin a man who's already unraveling. She paused, letting the words sink in. Here's my offer. Colin testifies against Leo and Pinnacle Group, fully disclosing every detail of their scheme. He steps away from the business world completely. No boardrooms, no deals. In return, I won't pursue a civil suit. Grayson's shoulders sagged, relief warring with resignation. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her lips curving slightly. You're letting him off lightly, Lila. Most would want blood. Lila's gaze softened, but her voice held steel. Blood doesn't rebuild communities. It doesn't fund scholarships or protect land for families who need it. I want to clean this industry, not add to its wreckage. Her words carried the weight of her mother's lessons, etched into her through years of stories about resilience over revenge. The pearl necklace at her throat felt warm, a reminder of that legacy. James slid a folder across the table, its contents outlining Lila's terms in stark black and white. This is non-negotiable, he said, his voice calm but firm. Mr. Haverford's cooperation buys him a chance to avoid ruin. Pinnacle's the real target, Leo and their executives. We have enough to bury them. Grayson skimmed the documents, his face paling. He'll agree, he said quietly. He has no choice. The SEC is already freezing his accounts and investors are pulling out. Without your leniency, he's facing bankruptcy and worse. Eleanor leaned back, her eyes studying Lila with something like admiration. You're a rare one, Lila. Most would have crushed him for less. She hesitated, then added, I'm pulling my funding from Leo's ventures. He's finished in my circles. And I'd like to discuss how I can support your foundation moving forward. Lila allowed a small smile, the first crack in her armor. I'd appreciate that, Eleanor. But let's focus on getting through this first. The older woman nodded, a silent pact forming between them. As the meeting ended, Grayson gathered his papers, his movements hurried, as if eager to escape the room's weight. Eleanor lingered, touching Lila's arm briefly. You've got steel of your own, my dear. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Lila met her gaze, a spark of gratitude flickering within her. Outside in the elevator, James turned to her. You sure about this? You could have taken everything. House, assets, his reputation. Lila watched the city descend through the glass walls. I don't need his money, James. I have my own. And his reputation's already in pieces. She thought of Colin's face at the press conference, the shock in his eyes as her words dismantled his world. This way, he lives with the truth, and so does Isabel. James raised an eyebrow. You think she's done meddling? Not a chance, Lila said, her voice low. She's watching, waiting for me to slip. But I'm ready. The elevator dinged, and they stepped into the bustling lobby, the world moving on despite the upheaval. Later, alone in her study, Lila opened her laptop, checking the secure accounts where she'd moved her $500 million trust. The numbers glowed, a fortress of her own making. She touched her necklace, her mother's voice echoing, Build, Lila, but protect what's yours. The meeting had been a victory, but the war wasn't over. Isabel's silence loomed like a shadow, and the SEC's investigation would bring more scrutiny. Lila closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She'd chosen justice over revenge, but the path ahead would test her strength, and she was ready to meet it head-on. A year had passed since the Plaza Hotel ballroom erupted in chaos, since Lila Jordan Thorne's measured words dismantled Colin Haverford's empire and exposed Leo Vance's treachery. The SEC's investigation had unraveled Pinnacle Group's predatory scheme, with Colin's testimony, given under the weight of Lila's mercy, sealing Leo's fate. Haverford Towers was a memory, its skeletal frame sold off to cover debts, and the Thorne family's name, once a beacon of new money ambition, now carried a taint of scandal. Lila, however, had not paused to savor the wreckage. She'd poured her energy into the Red Hook Community Trust, transforming her family's land into a thriving hub of affordable homes and community centers, a testament to her vision of equity over ego. On a crisp autumn morning, Lila stood on the Red Hook waterfront, the Brooklyn skyline sharp against a sky streaked with gold. The Trust's first completed building, a sleek, modern complex with green roofs and communal spaces, bustled with families moving in. Children darted through a courtyard, their laughter mingling with the hum of construction cranes nearby, where more projects were taking shape. Lila, now 29, wore a tailored coat over a dress she'd designed, its subtle geometric patterns echoing her heritage. Her pearl necklace gleamed softly at her throat, a quiet reminder of the legacy she'd fought to protect. She was no longer Colin's wife, but Lila Jordan, a name whispered with respect in boardrooms and community halls alike. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a news alert from a small Vermont publication. Curious, she opened it, and her breath caught. The article detailed a veterans housing project in a rural town, led by a man described as quiet, weathered, but driven. The accompanying photo showed Colin, his once polished features lined with fatigue, his blonde hair streaked with gray, standing among a group of smiling veterans outside a modest row of homes. He wore a flannel shirt, a far cry from his tailored suits, and his eyes held a calm she'd never seen in their marriage. The article noted he worked without pay, funding the project with what little he'd salvaged from his collapse. Lila leaned against a railing, the wind off the water cool against her face. She'd expected to feel vindication, perhaps even a flicker of triumph, but instead a bittersweet relief settled in her chest. Colin had taken her deal, testified against Leo, stepped away from the corporate world, and found something else, a path not built on steel, but on something humbler. She remembered his plea at the press conference, his desperate, "Lila, let's talk privately," and how she'd walked away, her heart heavy but resolute. Now seeing him in this new light, she felt no anger, only a quiet acknowledgement that he too was rebuilding from ashes. Her thoughts were interrupted by a young woman approaching, one of her foundation's mentees, clutching a tablet. "Ms. Jordan, the city council's approved the next phase of Red Hook. 3 more buildings." The girl's eyes shone with excitement, mirroring the pride Lila felt. "And your speech at the gala last month. It's gone viral. People are calling you a game changer." Lila smiled, tucking her phone away. "It's not about me, Aisha. It's about what we're building together." She gestured to the courtyard, where families were unpacking, their faces alight with hope. The Red Hook Community Trust wasn't just a project. It was a movement, funded by her $500 million trust and growing with grants from allies like Eleanor Vance. Lila's foundation had expanded, mentoring women in financial independence, teaching them to protect their assets and dreams, the lessons she'd learned the hard way. As Aisha walked away, Lila's gaze drifted to the horizon. The past year had been a whirlwind, moving her trust's assets, navigating the SEC's scrutiny, and facing Isabel Thorne's silent menace. Isabel had retreated after the scandal, her influence in the family business waning, but Lila knew she was watching, waiting for a misstep. The thought no longer unnerved her. She'd faced worse: Colin's betrayal, Leo's scheming, and emerged stronger. Her foundation's success was proof of that. Each brick in Red Hook a defiance of the burden label Colin had pinned on her. Later in her new office, a bright, airy space filled with sketches of her designs and photos of community events, Lila sat at her desk, reviewing plans for a STEM scholarship expansion. A framed letter from a mentee hung on the wall. "You showed me I don't need to hide my strength." It brought a lump to her throat, not unlike the one she'd felt a year ago, when humiliation had sparked her awakening. She touched her necklace, her mother's voice echoing, "Build, Lila, but protect what's yours." A knock at the door broke her reverie. James Chen stepped in, his usual calm tempered with a rare grin. "Good news. The SEC's wrapping up. Leo's facing charges, and Pinnacle's assets are frozen. Your move saved Red Hook, and more. You've got the city's attention now." Lila nodded, her eyes steady. "Good, but we're not done. Isabel's still out there, and she doesn't lose quietly." James's grin faded slightly. He knew the Thorne family's ruthlessness too well. "Any word on her?" Lila asked. "Nothing concrete," he said. "She's laying low, but my sources say she's meeting with investors, trying to rebuild. Be ready." "I always am," Lila replied, her voice carrying a quiet fire. The ashes of her old life had fertilized something new, but the ground wasn't settled yet. As James left, Lila turned to the window, the Brooklyn skyline a canvas of possibility. The seeds she'd planted were growing, but the next chapter loomed, and she'd face it with the same resolve that had brought her here. The Red Hook waterfront glowed under the late afternoon sun, its newly built residences alive with the laughter of families settling into homes that were more than brick and mortar. They were Lila Jordan Thorne's defiance of a past that had tried to diminish her. A year had passed since she'd exposed Colin's fraud and Leo's betrayal at the Haverford Towers press conference, and the seeds she'd planted in the ashes of that betrayal had bloomed into the Red Hook Community Trust, a beacon of hope in Brooklyn. Today was the inauguration of its first residential complex, and Lila, now 29, stood on a modest stage in the courtyard, surrounded by residents, local leaders, and her foundation's mentees. Her tailored dress, woven with subtle African-inspired patterns, caught the light, and her mother's pearl necklace rested at her throat, a quiet anchor as she prepared to speak. The crowd hushed as Lila stepped to the microphone, her presence commanding without effort. She'd read the Vermont article about Colin just weeks ago, his quiet work with veterans, a humbled shadow of the man who'd called her a burden. The bittersweet relief she'd felt then lingered, softening her edges, but not her resolve. Isabel Thorne's absence today was conspicuous. Her silence since the scandal felt like a coiled spring, but Lila refused to dwell on it now. This moment was for the families before her, for the future she was building. When I started this journey, Lila began, her voice clear and warm, I was told that some burdens are too heavy to carry. Responsibility, truth, the weight of standing up when it's easier to stay quiet. She paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd, catching the nods of mothers and the bright gazes of children. But I learned those burdens aren't chains. They're keys. They unlocked my strength, my voice. Building this community, this future, isn't a burden. It's a blessing. The applause was thunderous, rippling through the courtyard like a wave. Lila's heart swelled, not with pride but with purpose. She stepped back, letting a young mentee, a girl who designed a solar panel prototype with her foundation support, take the stage to share her story. As the girl spoke, Lila's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the Brooklyn skyline met the water. She'd transformed her $500 million trust into homes and opportunities, proving Colin wrong with every brick laid. But the weight of Isabel's unseen presence nagged at her, a reminder that not all battles were won. After the ceremony, Lila retreated to her new office, a light-filled space in Red Hook adorned with sketches of her designs and photos of community events. She sank into her chair, pulling up plans for a STEM scholarship expansion, partnered with Eleanor Vance, whose support had grown since the press conference. A framed letter on the wall caught her eye, from a mentee who'd written, "You showed me I don't need to hide my strength." Lila's fingers brushed her pearl necklace, her mother's voice echoing, "Build, Lila, but protect what's yours." The words grounded her, but a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. James Chen stepped in, his usual calm tinged with urgency. "Lila, the SEC's case is closed. Leo's facing 5 years and Pinnacle's bankrupt. You did it." He hesitated, then added, "But Isabel's moving. My sources say she's pitching a new project to investors, claiming she can restore the Thorne name. She's been asking about your funding streams." Lila's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Let her try. My accounts are locked, and Red Hook's untouchable. She's grasping at straws." Still, the news unsettled her. Isabel's ruthlessness had always been a shadow over her marriage, her cold stares a constant accusation of outsider. Lila had expected a counterattack, but not this soon. James nodded, sensing her unease. "You're ahead of her, but stay sharp. She doesn't play fair." As he left, Lila's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. She opened it, and a photo loaded. Colin, standing behind a group of Vermont veterans, their smiles bright against a backdrop of new homes. He looked older, his blonde hair graying, but his eyes held a quiet peace. There were no words, just the image, a silent nod across the distance. Lila stared at it, her chest tightening with a mix of emotions. She didn't hate him. She pitied the man who'd lost himself to ambition and found redemption in humility. But pity wouldn't distract her from the fight ahead. She stood crossing to the window, the Brooklyn sky now tinged with dusk. The inauguration had been a triumph, but Isabel's moves signaled a new front. Lila's foundation was more than a charity. It was a movement, mentoring women to protect their futures, just as she'd protected hers. Eleanor's partnership would amplify that, but Isabel's scheming loomed like a storm cloud. Lila whispered to herself, "I'm not just free, I'm home," the words of vow to the city she was reshaping. Outside, the courtyard glowed with string lights, families lingering in celebration. Lila's gaze fell on a young boy sketching designs in a notebook, his mother beaming beside him. This was why she fought, not for revenge, but for them. As she turned back to her desk, a new email from Eleanor popped up. "Ready to launch the STEM fund. Name it after you?" Lila smiled, typing a reply. "Name it after the kids. They're the future." The war with Isabel was coming, but Lila was ready, her roots deep in the ground she'd reclaimed. As Lila's journey unfolds from the sting of betrayal to the triumph of reclaiming her power, we hope her story resonates with you. What did you feel as she turned burdens into blessings? Share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear how her resilience inspires you. Thank you for joining us in this tale of strength and justice. Stay tuned for more stories that spark hope and courage. Until next time.